Dub Nation, last night showed us that this Warriors team is broken spiritually. Said it in yesterday's video. It's a state of emergency if they can't beat this Heat team, considering where the Heat had come from in the last 48 hours. Sure enough, the Heat, more energy, more physical, more urgency, more togetherness. Now, before we get into the big picture of all of this, let's talk about on the court stuff, right? And I know the headline is the shooting, right? The Warriors, all of a sudden, one of the worst shooting teams in the league. Is it the law of averages? What's going on? I could go individually and tell you some mechanical things, like, for instance, Buddy Hield gets out over his toes. It's in his feet. He gets too high on his toes. He gets off balance. You combine that with some suspect shot selection. He's not making shots. Moses Moody, the dip in his shot, how he has to dip the ball down below his waist before he shoots it, makes it so he needs a bigger window to shoot. When he doesn't have that window, that's going to speed up his mechanics and he's not going to knock him down, right? There's various reasons individually, but you would hope that the shooters, at least on paper, the Warriors are a better shooting team than they've shown. I think the bigger problem is they've let the poor shooting affect their defense, right? And gone are the hard traps, the scrambles, winning 50-50 balls, the rotations on a string that we saw. You know what I'm saying? That's completely gone. And it's funny because in that first month of the season, everyone wanted to give Jerry Stackhouse all this credit. And I guess rightfully so, right? Like, he was the head of the defense, the spear of the defense, the coaching of the defense. Where's Jerry Stackhouse been? I ain't seen Stackhouse, right? But ultimately, it starts with Draymond being that backline communicator. And that's just not what he's doing anymore. He's not talking. There's no talking going on defensively with this Warriors team. And it starts and stops with Steph and Draymond, because the two leaders, the two franchise players, they have to be the talkers for everyone else to start doing it. And so the easy thing to do is say, hey, they shot 25% from three last night against a zone, which was, hey, let's talk about that zone here for a second from the Heat, because, you know, a lot of teams will flash a zone or show a zone, but to really be effective, it's got to be a part of who you are. You've got to practice it and you've got to utilize it on a regular basis in order to be on a string and for the guys to move in the right spots and then understand it. And the Heat do that. There's no doubt about that. That can disrupt the rhythm. But when you're the Warriors roster, especially with no Kuminga, when you get the ball, everyone knows since high school, really since middle school, you get the ball to the middle of the zone, right? But if the guy that gets the ball in the middle of the zone is not a threat to score the ball, it doesn't do a whole lot for you. And that's what you saw last night, right? But just beyond not shooting well, to me, the defense and lack of communication is more concerning, because Kerr said a crisis in confidence, and we'll get to Kerr here in a second, but just spiritually, you're watching them not talk and not have the energy. And to watch that tired Heat team coming off a double overtime loss the night before have more energy, have more spirit and want and will last night, I don't know how you can't be disheartened. Now, the other quote from Steve was, Steph is dealing with the emotions of not being competitive right now. And to get more specific, to me, it's like he's realizing, I can't shoot myself out of this one. I can't shoot ourselves out of this. It needs to be more. And again, it's got to start with the communication that way, the leadership that way. It's not fair to not mention no Pods, no Kuminga, no GP2, three of the higher motor, high energy guys not playing right now. But hey, the Heat are down, but like, everyone has these issues right now where their roster's not complete and have things that they're dealing with. So no one's going to feel sorry for the Warriors missing those guys. But unfortunately, it seems like the Warriors are feeling sorry for themselves. And Spo put on a coaching clinic last night. It seems as though these coaches that Steve has coached with in the Olympics and are very familiar with him, they know every move that they know exactly the Warriors' principles and how they're going to react. So it wasn't just the zone, but it was how the Warriors defense was going to react. And they were getting open looks off of one pass, right? They would come off a handoff, make one pass, and have wide open looks. There's the exit pointing. There's all this pointing, right? That's when you know the communication's bad and they're not talking. When you see that amount of pointing on defense, it means that the mouths aren't moving. They're just trying to point switch. And so that's, it's hard to watch, man. It's hard to watch. And again, it's got to go back to Draymond. If we're going to hang our hat and say Draymond's going to be here till the end, that's a huge element of what he does. Okay, fine. He's shooting the 3 ball better. He shows his spurts of, who he once was, but he's got to take the lead defensively here because I don't know where Jerry Stackhouse is. They had Jaime Jaquez look like Jamal Mashburn last night, right? I mean, what's really going on? What's really going on here? Trace Jackson, what do you have? 19-6, couple of big finishes. And I know some of you are going to say, hey, I thought you just said Trace is not a starting. Say, wait. If we're being honest here, he was a huge beneficiary of the heat zone, right? Like, I don't want to take anything, I liked that Trace remained aggressive against his former Hoosier, right? The young kid Ware. So he did some good things, but at the end of the day, in my breakdown today, I show it a bunch of times, Bam was beating him to the glass all night. You say, oh, he had a big dunk. He dunked on somebody. He had 19 points. Listen, if every other team in the league played zone, maybe Trace would be that effective on a nightly basis. But the truth is they're not. The teams aren't doing that, right? And to just get beat, I know we didn't get beat rebound-wise in the stat box, but if you watched it, the eye test, Miami was quicker to the loose balls. They were better and faster in transition. And I just don't know how that happens, given them coming off that double overtime game. We're at a tipping point here. And that brings me to Kerr, where I know I just said, hey, I think we're too focused on Steve. That wasn't to say Steve doesn't deserve a ton of blame for these last few years. My point was it's exhausting to constantly blame every element of the game on Steve because the NBA has always been a players' league and will always be. At the end of the day, the players got to play. At the same time, there has been a loud minority of fans that have always felt Steve just was handed this, right? He was handed Steph Curry, 4 Hall of Famers at one point, and he's just highly overrated. It's time for Steve to prove them wrong. Like it's time for Steve to prove that he is a Hall of Fame level coach, because regardless of blame pie and who's at fault in this, there's so many butterfly effects and different elements to all of this. He said it himself. There's a crisis in confidence. Now, that's definitely got to fall on him, a big portion of that. There's no doubt about it. The way he's toyed with the rotations, that hasn't helped at all. But just big picture, spiritually, can he find a way to collectively build the confidence of this team right now, headed on this road trip? Can he find a way to lift their spirits and get them to talk? And if he cannot, then his time as the coach has run its course. He's officially lost the team. And I don't know what else you do. Now, the optics of firing Steve Kerr, it doesn't seem feasible, at least not in this season. This summer, I'm not taking it off the table. The way things are going, right? If we circle this block of games and now we head out east of where this season falls apart and we're not even a play-in team, and we're starting to, look at Cooper Flag highlights, then I think it's very much on the table this summer that Steve may have to leave it, just because, again, it's run its course. If he can no longer motivate these guys and they can no longer play with spirit, their collective confidence is in crisis. I mean, that's what you're there to do, bro. That's what you're there to do. And so I'm very interested to see, as they head out on this road trip, what type of spirit they have. The shooting is going to be the shooting. You imagine it's going to come around. I think more importantly, they've got to communicate. They've got to start talking out there. Dennis Schroeder is doing the most talking. He's the newest member of the team, right? And we're really going to find out. I mean, the Kerr haters, I know y'all waiting for it. I'm not rooting for it. What I'm rooting for is this to get turned around and fixed, or for a direction to be picked here, right? Whether that is, all right, we got to lean into the youth and who knows who's going to be traded, or we're going to make a push here and still be competitive this year. I just want it to go one way or the other. But we're going to really find out here if Steve Kerr, is who we think he is, or is who y'all thought he was. And it's just not, can he reach them? Because I'm not seeing it. And you understand the frustration in this, but when you watch him go to the bench, when you watch these guys go to the bench, and when you watch them, It's a saying that I've said for years. You can't simulate hunger, right? You're either hungry or you're not. And Steph and Draymond, they're too full. I know that they're frustrated and their competitive spirit is calling them to be hungry and find that edge. But there's all these little things that happen within a game where Steph flings the ball to Draymond, he's not looking, right? Or there's super soft out. How many and ones did they have last night? Like 4 or 5 and ones? That's just a representation that we're playing soft and indecisive. We're just a step behind everything, right? And it's those moments, those mental errors. Steph misses the box out at the end of the quarter that let you know, like, they're just not dialed in. They can say they want it, but I don't know if they can really find that hunger anymore. And so maybe it's not all on Steve to motivate him, but it is. That's at the end of the day, you're the head coach. You've got to find a way to build the spirit of this team again, because if they're not playing for you any longer, then you serve no purpose. So yeah, man, I'm goes without saying, I'm super disappointed and frustrated with the way things are going, but I'm also curious to find out what's what in these next 10 days. I think we're going to find out what's what. We're either going to start looking at these prospects in that way, or we're going to say, okay, they flipped a switch, like they found something, or do they make a panic trade move? Do we go get Zion today? Is the news breaking right now? I don't know, man. All I can do is tell you how I'm feeling and how I see it. I had a pretty volatile breakdown of this one that's on my Patreon today. I will link that in the description. And where do they go? Indiana, Detroit, Toronto. Maybe not in that order. You'd say winnable games, but you'd be amazed. You watch the league night in and night out. All these teams are competitive. All these teams. That's the one thing I'll say, and that's what's so discouraging. Because you look at a Raptors team, or you look at some of these teams and you say they don't have the talent. You know what I mean? They're just not good enough yet, right? But when you turn them on a nightly basis, you're like, dang, they play pretty hard. Like, they play with some spirit. Like, if we may not have the shooting, we may not have the talent. If you ain't gonna play with spirit, then what are we doing? Get Steve out of here. That's how I'm feeling. Let me know how y'all feeling in the comments. As always, hit that like, share, and subscribe. I'm out, y'all.